Upon graduating the University of Kentucky in 1995, John began working with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet in Bowling Green District. In 2001, he transferred to the Central Office's Operations and Pavement Management Branch before becoming Director of Maintenance in 2014. John wants to use the remainder of his bio shamelessly plugging the amazing work of the Central Office in the District of Kentucky, KYTC, staff who are responsible for the success of the pavement preservation program in Kentucky. Can't believe you got me to read this, which is now on a trajectory to truly transform how Kentucky's highways are maintained. The impact of their efforts cannot be overstated. John, turn it over to you.
Thanks, Heath. I think I was told to keep it at 100 words, and I think those were 99, so I had to rephrase it a couple of times to get under the limit. Yeah, I don't have any slides, but I did want to talk about some of the challenges that we see with performance measures, particularly as it relates to pavements and pavement preservation. And I want to start by saying that I in Kentucky, the Transportation Cabinet in Kentucky, support the efforts to come up with national measures and recognize the challenges that were faced in developing those. First of all, you have to understand when you're setting these goals and these measures, you have to decide, well, what are reasonable things for every state to measure? And I'm sure that dozens of things were discussed, and IRI was an obvious thing that most states were already collecting, where everyone was already collecting. And then you look at percent cracking, rutting, and faulting as things that, well, maybe not everyone's collecting, but it would be reasonable to assume that if they were asked to, that they could eventually get to. And so those were the things that were settled on, and I understand that. Then you have to look at, well, what are the reasonable thresholds to set? And you have to set some thresholds that are reasonable for everyone to achieve. And as Steve was saying earlier, you look at Connecticut and Kentucky and New Jersey and California and North Dakota, and you try to make you set a threshold that applies to everyone, and people are going to say, well, you can't do that, but if you want to have some kind of national measure, you have to have reasonable thresholds. And in order to do that, I think what we've done is we've set the thresholds higher than we might have done if you'd been looking at it on a state-by-state basis. And the example I'll give you is in Kentucky. We have always done our own data collection for IRI. For 30 plus years we've been collecting IRI in Kentucky using state forces and state-owned equipment. And recently in 2013 we started collecting rutting and laser crack measurement to get our percent cracking. And we were already wanting to move in that direction. We wanted to go from semi-automated, where we were collecting IRI but we were doing visual surveys ourselves. We wanted to go to as much fully automated as we could. So we were already moving that direction before MAP 21. When MAP 21 came out, it gave us some more justification to move that effort forward a little faster. And when we looked at our data and compared it to the national measures for IRI, rutting, faulting, cracking, we found on our interstate system, we had less than 1% poor pavements. So great, Kentucky's doing a great job. And so you might ask, well, why is that an issue? But when you compare it to how we had historically measured our pavements, where we were looking at IRI and also doing a visual survey of cracking and other distresses like longitudinal joint deterioration. So we have an interstate pavement that may have an IRI in the 150 range. Maybe it's got a percent cracking of 15%, and a longitudinal joint that is completely coming apart. You've got a 6-inch gap between the lanes. It's maybe a couple of inches deep and may extend for several hundred feet. Maybe 90% of the pavement is like that. But longitudinal joint deterioration, even if you call that cracking, that's just one distress in the new measures. So that would not be considered a poor pavement, but Kentucky would have considered that a poor pavement. And we would have prioritized that for some kind of a treatment. And why that's an issue, because you compare the proposed rule where we've got less than 1% poor pavements to the way we've measured, and we said our interstates are about 20 to 25% poor. The reason that's a problem for us is that as we have tried to promote preservation and we've argued for the need for more proactive measures in maintenance, we have said, here is our backlog of needs on our interstate system, our NHS, our non-NHS system, and we project out into the future and say, here's where we are now, here's where we're going to be if we don't be more proactive. And we've always said, you know, we're going to get up to 30 and 40% poor pavements. When we make those arguments to our legislature and then they see a report that says that Kentucky's interstate pavements are less than 1% poor, they are going to question our judgment. And we have a highway plan that the state-funded portion is currently about 300% over-programmed. I mean, they've got, well, actually it's 200% over-programmed. We've got 3 times as much projects in the state-funded portion of our highway plan than we have money for. And most of those, as you can imagine, are capital projects, widening projects, new bypasses, new interchanges. They're not typically maintenance projects. When you have a program or a plan that's so much over-programmed, you have to make hard choices. And recently we went through some budget issues that caused us to have to make even tougher choices so that projects that were being planned to move forward, we were about to go into the design right-of-way phase, we've held back on. And right now we are only doing primarily maintenance projects out of our state-funded plan, and very few of those. But there's only so long that you can keep that up. Legislators are going to want to get those projects out to get the new bypasses, get those ribbon cuttings. And if we are arguing that we need to do more maintenance based on our measures and we see something that contradicts what we've been saying, it's going to give more ammunition to those who say, well, you don't need to do these type treatments. You don't need to worry about preservation. And I don't say that as a criticism of the performance measures or the challenges that FHWA went through to try to come up with some national measures. I just want to point it out as a challenge that we do have to recognize, and we have to communicate to everyone that there's a difference between the percent poor and what needs to be addressed. And it may be a terminology thing where we need to come up with some other definition or some other phrase that defines a pavement that needs to be addressed. But I think that is something that we need to look into. And the way I compare it is if you look at the poverty level in the United States, I think that the threshold for income for a family of 4 is about $24,000 a year for a family of 4. Well, one way you could eliminate poverty in the United States is to change that threshold to 0, and suddenly we've eliminated poverty. But you haven't changed the reality. And that's the situation in Kentucky. You know, we've got a new threshold that says that Kentucky's pavements on the interstate are no longer 24% poor. You've only got 1% poor, but the reality hasn't changed. And so that's the message that we need to make sure that we get out there. Thanks.